Hello and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzy Ostwald. Wisdom is a virtue that is often promoted by religion and contemplated in philosophy. Wisdom is usually seen as a positive human attribute, but defining and understanding what it is can be tricky and difficult. In addition, attaining and utilizing wisdom, as important as that might be, can prove elusive. My guest today, Kayt Warren, is a licensed clinical mental health and wellness practitioner in the Department of Social Work here at Appalachian State University, and she not only understands wisdom, but practices it. Thank you for joining us, Kayt. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Great. Why don't we start just by you introducing yourself and your work and describing what you do here at Appalachian.
Okay. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Social Work, and I'm also a licensed clinical addiction specialist, and I do mental health counseling at the Mood Treatment Center. And in addition to that, I teach a fitness class, a bar fitness class at Deer Valley.
Yeah, and that's where I met you, I guess.
That's our connection.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So in our discussions and in our conversations, you have mentioned holistic health, holistic wellness as something that you promote, I guess, in your own clinical work. Could you describe for us what you mean by holistic wellness, holistic health?
Yeah, absolutely. So I tend to use wellness and well-being somewhat interchangeably. So if I mix those up. So I do believe wellness and well-being to be more of a place, like a static you have reached, and it's all usually surrounded in physical health. And then I look at holistic well-being or holistic wellness as more of a process, an integrated process of decisions, integrity, choices, in an effort to always be becoming better, a better version of yourself. And it's more of a multidimensional, so it includes obviously the physical well-being, but also mental and emotional, even social or environmental. And in relation to this conversation, it absolutely carries a spiritual piece as well.
Yeah, and that was going to be my follow-up question. Is there a role for a place for spirituality in this concept of wholeness and wellness?
In my conceptualization, I would say yes, because my interpretation of spirituality is a connection with something greater, or striving to connect with something greater. And that usually helps people, and it gives them some sort of peace when things seem to kind of go awry.
Yeah, and so spirituality is not religion, but it's a component within religion.
I think it can be.
Yeah. Okay.
I think it depends on the individual.
Right.
I think some individuals, their religion fuels their spirituality.
So do you, an atheist can be spiritual in this
I
sense
believe
with
so.
your definition?
I believe so.
Yeah, so do you consciously employ a component of spirituality when you're working with someone, or do you kind of listen for what they have to say before going there, or?
I let them guide that.
Okay. Okay. So how does spirituality impact one's, you said physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual. How does spirituality fit into those other two components? Does it feed into only the emotional part, or I guess if I follow your lead, you can't break these things apart, right? This is integrative health.
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. And if we're looking at all of the different pieces, or in social work we like to call them systems, if you're looking at like the environmental wellness, talking about like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So with this theory, it would be challenging for somebody to connect with their spirituality when they're not even getting their basic needs met. So if somebody's struggling with hunger or poverty or living in a war-torn area, they may have more trouble connecting with their spiritual piece. Or if they are more religious, it may help them to connect with their spirituality.
I see, yeah.
So it's very dependent on the individuals that I'm working with.
You mentioned Maslow's hierarchy of
did.
needs. I hear that a lot from educators and from mental health practitioners. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about that. And I see now kind of what you were talking about, that there are certain kind of fundamental needs, I guess, here that have to be met before you can ascend the hierarchy or ascend the pyramid.
Yes. So in its raw form, this theory states that without your physiological you're not even going to get to the safety or the love and belonging or the esteem. And according to Maslow, only about 5% of the human population will reach this self-actualization. And those are your Mother Teresa, Gandhi. And I don't necessarily believe that to be true. I take bits of this theory because I think you can sort of ebb and flow out of these dependent on life situations. But I do think without your physiological needs being met, it's going to be very challenging to reach this place of holistic well-being, which to me includes that connection to your spirituality.
Right. And I guess the emotional part comes into areas like love and belonging, sense of connection and intimacy. So this is really interesting because I'm sorry to hear that only 5% of us reach the pinnacle. But
I believe that to be antiquated.
Okay, all right, good, because that seems to be where religion points people as well.
Right.
And goes by different names. Sometimes it's called sanctification or becoming more holy or whatever. But this idea of self-actualization, becoming or desiring to become what one's potential holds for them, is a religious virtue, I think, in many traditions, right?
Yeah.
And I see it in this is where meditation takes one, for example. And I don't know if you work with meditation.
I do,
or not at
and
all.
Mindfulness.
Okay.
Yeah, and even by definition, if you look at this pinnacle, the self-actualization, desired to become the most that one can be, well, that's identified individually.
Right.
And so if somebody believes that they're there, why are we to tell them that they're not?
I see, yeah. So this would be a model for, I guess, secular counseling.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, is that okay to say that?
Yes.
So how would, if someone were a deeply religious person and they were skeptical of, say, secular counseling, how would a religious-based counseling differ or from what you're doing here, or would it?
Well, I think it would depend denominationally. So, because I have a colleague who does faith-based counseling, and her faith-based is a Baptist faith, and so that resonates with her counseling. She brings that into almost every session. But the people that are seeking her are seeking that. And so for me, it would be unethical for me to impose my spiritual or religious views on a client. So I'll let them take that lead. And I mean, I will say, if I don't know enough about that particular religion, I'm very honest in saying I'm not familiar, but I will learn the best I can. Or if it is more comfortable to you for me to refer you to somebody who is more your speed, I'm fine with that too. And it's not about me.
So one thing you said just then kind of resonates with me. You said it would be unethical to impose your own kind of spirituality upon the process, right? So it sounds like something educators say a lot. I teach in a religion department, right? So it would be unethical for me to impose my own religious beliefs or spirituality upon what I'm teaching. And sometimes there's a fine line there.
Yes.
But even though I know you uphold the utmost in ethical values and you wouldn't impose your spirituality on others, is there some way in which your own spirituality affects your work or informs your work maybe?
Yes, I think so, because I am always striving to be in that place of holistic well-being. And without that connection to my spirituality, I'm not the best version of myself. And so if I'm not a great version of myself, I'm not going to be a good therapist. I'm not going to be a good professor. I can't relay information in a way if I'm not well.
Right.
And so that's how I connect it all.
That's interesting. So as a practitioner, you need to be the best version of yourself if you're going to help others become the best version of themselves.
I try, which is why I try to address these things so that I can be because nobody's going to crave my assistance if I'm a mess.
Right.
And so I talk to a lot of my students about self-care and what that looks like and how we can really work through our own struggles and trauma and grief issues so that we can be well enough to help others when they're sharing very deep, intimate things with us. And we need to be prepared. And if we're not well, then we can get caregiver fatigue and burnout.
Yeah. So there's so many parallels here between what you're describing as wellness and what I hear religions describe as a spiritual path or a path of spirituality. And it seems like one of the kind of common elements here is this need to be constantly self-reflective. So you need to be checking in on yourself. And then the second theme is to have a guide, a person, in this case a counselor, in the case of religion, a spiritual guide or a spiritual mentor, to be able to not only I guess, to test out those self-reflections and to get feedback. So it's kind of a feedback loop.
Feedback, to have somebody to, like I always tell my students, I'm like, have people in your corner that are going to tell you when you're not well. Because we don't always know, especially if we're busy and giving for everybody else. It's not always, we don't have time to say, how am I doing right now? And so have people that will say, I'm concerned about you.
So is that part of a social network, or do we need a counselor on call? I mean,
I think it's individual dependent.
Yeah.
I think everybody needs a therapist at some point in their life, if not ongoing. I think we need to destigmatize the whole seeking help, asking for help. But for me, it's like clinical supervision. I'm very particular about my friends and who I bring into my inner circle. And, we've talked about, eliminating toxic relationships. And I think these are self-care. This is self-care. This is boundaries that are very beneficial to become a great version of yourself, to reach self-actualization.
I might want to come back to that concept of self-care a little later. I want to hear more about that, but there's a couple other things I want to talk about too.
Okay.
I didn't grow up Catholic, but I always thought one of the genius things about Catholic faith is the idea of confession and being able to formally go to a spiritual advisor and have someone that you can trust in confidentiality to talk to about matters that are of concern. Do you know much about this process? Is this a type of the feedback loop here that you're talking about, but within a religious context?
I think it's very similar. I like to tell, everybody, but my clients mainly, like we should not be judged by what we consider to be our biggest mistakes. And so we keep these things that we believe are shortcomings or mistakes, and we make them secrets, and we hold on to them. And I think 12-step programs are very beneficial in certain scenarios, but I don't live by them. But there's a saying in the rooms of 12-step programs that say we're only as sick as our secrets. And so it's very, very much normalizing. Things are going to happen. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to make bad choices, but don't own them and push them down. Put them back out there.
Right.
Understand that forgiveness is possible, and you can forgive yourself. And I think that's
a
incredible.
Good word. That's a religious word there.
So we're not that different.
So repressing our secrets and maintaining a guilty state all the time makes us spiritually sick, right?
Sick.
In the religion world, and I guess in your world, it would make one emotionally sick, or maybe even use the word spiritually sick.
Well, which is that difference between well-being and holistic well-being.
Right.
Because you could be physically fine, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, you can be really, really struggling. And we don't have any problem saying, go see the doctor. But it's not the same as saying, why don't you seek therapy?
There is a stigma. Why is that in our culture? That there's not a stigma when you're physically sick, you go to the doctor, you seek care, and you get well. But there is a stigma attached to emotional
There is.
sickness. What's going on there, and how do we overcome that?
Having these conversations.
Okay, yeah.
And advocating for policy change, advocating for insurance to cover more therapy sessions, psychopharmaceutical medications. It's historically we have looked when somebody's seeking help for their mental concerns that they're crazy. And so we put that into, I don't want to be crazy, I don't want to, and it really does, we push things down. So we don't tell people like, I'm not well today.
Yeah, and I know that culturally speaking, if you admit to someone, in some scenarios, if you admit to someone that you're suffering from depression, and say, well, what's wrong with you? Just get over it.
Just get over it.
Get over it. Pick yourself up by your bootstraps or whatever, and move on.
Or human nature is to then say, well, I used to be depressed, but this is how I fixed it. Well, not everybody can do that.
Right.
I had a friend one time, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and he made light of it, and he said, you get a diagnosis of cancer and people bring you cake. You get a diagnosis of bipolar and people hide their purse.
That's awful.
And it's true.
Really is true. Yeah,
and he said people just cut him out left and right.
That's a shame.
It's a shame.
And it doesn't encourage people then to, all it does is encourage people to repress and
Right.
be more secretive about these conditions and issues.
Right.
Well, I'm glad you're doing this work.
Well, thank you.
So in our conversations too, you mentioned something that really caught my attention, and I did a little reading about it. But a phrase you used was practitioner wisdom.
Yes.
And wisdom is another one of those concepts that is important in religion and spirituality. every major religion that I know about has something to say about wisdom. So can you tell me a little bit about how you conceive of wisdom? And I have a great quote here, I think, from Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Zen Buddhist monk. Wisdom is a living stream, not an icon to be preserved in a museum. Only when a practitioner finds the spring of wisdom in his or her own life can it flow to a future generation. It reminded me of what you said earlier, that you have to be the best version of yourself, right? You're the practitioner, and if you're going to employ wisdom in your work, you have to have it in yourself.
And it's a process. It says it's a living stream. It's not like I've arrived. I'm holistically well and I've obtained all the wisdom. I don't believe that to be true. And I can't take credit for the term practitioner wisdom. Dr. Jack Kwong and Dr. Peter Fossen did some research and wrote a really great article, which has helped me to conceptualize how I view wisdom. And for years, I thought it was just acquired over practice. Like I would, one day I would just have all this practitioner wisdom. What I wasn't realizing was that I was already using it. I already had it. And it's ever evolving. My wisdom is continuing to grow, hopefully. I mean, that's what I'm thinking. And so we've always, as a society, said wisdom comes with practice. You get your education, you get out and practice, and then you obtain this wisdom. But I believe that discounts the wisdom that's coming in with new practitioners, people that are just starting out, that are bringing their lived experience to the table. They might not have as much time in actual practice, but that doesn't mean that they don't obtain or that they don't possess that some level of practitioner wisdom. So I think there's a difference between experience and wisdom.
Right.
And just because you have experience doesn't mean you have the practitioner wisdom.
Yeah, that's kind of a different concept we have of wisdom, because we normally think, well, wisdom comes with age, right? So you have to have all this lived experience before you can attain wisdom. So it sounds like you're saying that wisdom is not something so much that you attain over time, but rather something that is almost like a personality trait.
Well, I think it's both.
Okay.
I think the more you make mistakes, the more you have successes, this adds to your wisdom base. But I don't think we can say you only get wisdom through time and experience.
Right.
I think it comes with other areas as well.
So I know Jack and Peter. Peter's your colleague, Jack is my colleague, and this is a new concept, I take it, in counseling and practitioner wisdom. It seems to me like it puts a lot of pressure on the practitioner herself, right? I mean, it relies upon your ability to take virtues that are necessary for being a good counselor and then to put them into practice. Am I misreading the concept here?
No, I can definitely see how you got there. And I think a lot of times we misinterpret wisdom with clinical intuition. And again, leading back to me being well and being the best version of myself and taking care of myself, then I don't tend to second guess what I'm doing, because I have confidence in my wisdom and I have confidence in my intuition. I'm not saying I don't make mistakes, because everybody does, but I think the mistakes I've made have led me to where I am now.
Right.
So I think mistakes can be beneficial as long as they're not incredibly harmful or unethical.
Right. So is it important for a practitioner to possess other virtues that are normally associated with wisdom or with your field, such as compassion and empathy and, I don't know, what else, consideration and so forth?
Yeah, well, empathy is the big one.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're working with somebody and they're consistently making the same choices that are harming their daily living, but we're providing information and we're trying to help guide them and they're not listening, if we don't have empathy, then we can't understand, and then we make it about us. And it's like, why do you keep making these choices, as opposed to, this is very hard for this person, the choices they're making are worked for them, they're just trying to protect themselves. So without that empathy, it's really, it's challenging to be an effective counselor.
Right. So part of your practitioner work is counseling, but part of your practitioner work is also educating students who will be future counselors and social workers. Do you ever run across a student and you say, look, you don't have the compassion and virtue that you need to be a good, effective counselor? Maybe you should seek another line of work? Or is that a human quality that we all have that can be nurtured and accentuated?
I think everybody has some level of empathy. I'm not talking sociopaths, but
Right.
everybody, it's there and it can be nurtured. But the beauty of the field of social work is that not everybody that's going into social work is going to be a counselor.
I see. Yeah.
Because we have social workers in politics and we have social workers in more macro places. And so differing levels of empathy, first off, I don't discount anybody because I firmly believe in the human capacity to change and grow. But I have had some students that, I've said maybe one-on-one counseling isn't your wheelhouse.
Right.
But let's investigate other arenas to help you where you need to be.
My guess is, though, that a student wouldn't be drawn to social work or counseling
Usually
unless
not.
they had those virtues
Yes.
of compassion and empathy to start with.
Yes, sometimes we have to reel them in and say, let's start at the bottom.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've been struggling a little bit with just how to define wisdom, and talking with you has helped me. But I found a couple of charts here. Maybe we can put them up on the screen and we can just talk about them a little bit.
Okay.
Because, again, wisdom is something that theologians and spiritualists talk about. So I found this to be interesting. Another hierarchy that's not so different from Maslow, actually, where you have data, information, knowledge, and wisdom in a kind of relational hierarchy. Could you maybe comment on this? Does this make sense?
It does. It does. And for me, I see wisdom almost as a spectrum. And so, yes, I think all of these pieces will, add up to hopefully create wisdom. But I think wisdom can be in all of these places. So wisdom is all of the things that have occurred in your life have created, your personality and all the pieces and the way your brain works. Well, there's some wisdom in that. And so I feel like we've always said, what's next? What's next? What's next? Always trying to when are you going to get married? What's after college? What's after this? But then that's a strange analogy, but I'm thinking we're saying when do you get to that wisdom? But we might be discounting that wisdom might fall in all of these places as we continue to collect more and more. And wisdom can be practitioner wisdom, it can be social wisdom, it can be spiritual wisdom. And I think everybody gets there differently.
Yeah. So does this, and I like that, does this make sense in some sense that wisdom is an application
Yes.
of knowledge and information and data? And that's why you can say that wisdom can be applied in so many different places at so many different times.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't want people to think that they don't have wisdom until they get to the peak.
Right.
So
That's the danger of stuff like this.
Yes.
It makes it seem like, and even this chart suggests that wisdom is some future state.
that you don't know, when do you ever get there?
Right.
And I think a lot of people, and I've talked to colleagues that have been in this field for 20, 30 years, and they still say, I feel like I'm struggling with imposter syndrome. And I'm like,
Well, don't we all?
well, yeah. and I think there's some humility in that, which is good, but that's kind of saying you never get there
Right.
and not trusting what you already have.
I see.
It's a linear process.
Yeah. Well, let's look at the next slide if we can. I think this one also helped me to begin to understand wisdom in a more expansive way. And what I liked about this one was that the ability to embrace uncertainty and difference and diversity rather than being closed off to those things, the ability to understand or try to understand other people's perspectives, and I guess that's empathy. And then you just mentioned intellectual humility, and then the ability to compromise. Do you see these as qualities of being a wise person?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. And if you look at just the word humility in and of itself, it's just such a beautiful quality for people to say it's okay to know what you don't know. But I like this too because it is a visual of all the different pieces that can factor into wisdom and the process of obtaining wisdom.
Yeah. And a lot of this, and again, the part I like about this is that it points outward.
Yes.
Right. So there's a kind of pro-social aspect of wisdom. The stereotype, I guess, is the guru sitting on a mountaintop and never sharing his thoughts with anybody. But wisdom only occurs when the student goes to the guru, and then there's this interaction.
This exchange, yeah.
So wisdom is not only involving self-reflection and inward reflection, but actually then reaching out to others.
I think so. because we don't exist in a vacuum.
Right.
You know, we're social beings. And so all of, even like if we're looking at the broader contexts, like environmental factors, which takes me back to that hierarchy of needs. So it's saying, you know, only 5% get there. That's not unlike saying only 5% get to wisdom.
Right. Yeah. So I really like your perspective that we all can be wise at different places in our life and at different stages in our life.
And in different arenas.
And in different arenas, right? And so it's not just the practitioners, it's not just the religious leaders, it's not just the teachers and the gurus that have wisdom.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's an important corrective. That and the idea that we need the feedback loop. I mean, that's the things that are really helpful to me in this conversation.
Humility.
Humility, that's right. Yeah. Humility is admitting that you need that feedback loop, I guess.
Yeah, and that you're not perfect, because nobody is.
Yeah, something else I read, and we'll wrap this up in a moment, but another quality of wisdom that I read about was the ability to regulate emotion.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? Not to be, say a little bit more about that.
Well, and this is what I talk to my students about. We as humans, because we don't talk about mental wellness, are easily triggered. And sometimes we're triggered based on our own defense mechanisms that we've acquired through our lifetime and all the things that have happened to us. And so emotional regulation is the ability to understand something that somebody says or does may trigger a response in us, but like naming it, owning it, and not projecting it onto somebody else, not being reactive. And so I encourage my students to be proactive in what kind of things will trigger you, because everybody gets triggered. That's very much human nature. It's what you do in that next moment. And so emotional regulation is incredibly important in all relationships, because if we react in a defensive way, the relationship changes immediately.
Have we lost our ability to regulate emotions in our society? Because
I think
it
some
seems like
have.
we're just kind of constantly in a situation where we're either triggering or being triggered and don't know how to react.
Because we don't talk about mental wellness.
We don't talk about it. So that's,
and we don't have the humility piece.
Yeah. And how did we lose that?
I don't know that we lost it. I just think now we have more outlets to be able to say things from, you know, on social media, or we're seeing things on media. I don't know that it was ever fully there.
Right.
But we definitely have never talked about emotional regulation in our society.
Yeah. Well, I have found this to be incredibly fascinating.
Same. I've really enjoyed this.
And I really appreciate this kind of parallel I see between what you're doing with wellness and wholeness and wisdom, and what spirituality does with it, and what religion teaches about it. I think there's probably more room for collaboration and conversation between these two areas.
Always.
Well, Kayt, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I'm so happy to have you here at Appalachian, and hope we can collaborate in the future.
We absolutely can.
Thanks for joining us.
All right, thanks, Ozzy.
Yeah. Well, that's it for this week on Religion and Life. I hope you'll join us next week. My guest will talk about the United Methodist Church and some of the struggles that Methodism is enduring at the current time. Until then, this is Ozzy Ostwald.